I wanted to talk about the ideas of multiverses and the use of meta in movies and TV. Now, in the hands of a good writer, a multiverse expands your ability to change the stakes that your character deals with and can create enhanced levels of adventure. Meta can enhance the wittiness of entertainingly and strikingly clever original concepts. In the hands of a bad writer, it creates an ADHD fueled, fast flowing sewer of poo and cringe. Now, it was Rick and Morty that led me to make this video. Uh, First couple of seasons I thought was some of the best content ever made, and I mean that not just as animation, but in general. They were very incredibly well done, character driven stories, and the key to it was a multiverse show with meta integrated into it, and then slowly it disintegrated into garbage to whereas in season 6 it's just absolute. It's so bad it's painful, and it's hard to even imagine that somehow these are the same characters that the show started with. So I'll get back into that in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about some other ventures into multiverse just to give you a feel for what makes things good and what things makes things bad. Okay, so probably one of the earliest uh, forays into the idea of a multiverse uh, was the original Star Trek and the Mirror Universe. Now you can see a few iterations in some of the early '60s, '50s sci-fi fantasy anthology shows. They didn't get too deep into it. Now initially, the Star Trek Mirror Universe seems to be uh, one of two universes that exist. As Star Trek goes on, obviously, they've had several episodes. It's clear that they believe in the idea of a multiverse. So, what makes this show work? What makes this particular episode function? Well, if you look at the two universes, technology wise, they're pretty much the same. A few minor details because each side has needs the other doesn't. um, what's the big change up here is that the system of morals is upended. Uh, in one universe, we had a situation, at least at this time was unknown. Later, they delve into the idea of how it happened. But we have a situation where the essentially do-gooder Federation is turned into the very violent and evil Terran Empire. Now, the reason why this works is you take the characters from the light universe and you put them into the dark universe. And in theory, what happens here is it because the moral landscape is so different. In theory, you could have them do practically anything, but you don't want to. So it puts them into a position where, on one hand, they're limited by their morals, but they have to somehow act their way out of the situation so that they don't get spotted. And that's what makes it a good story. Because even though you've opened up the barriers to them, you've given them latitude to do new things, they're still limited by their own character types. A thought I had was there's a point where Chekhov is being tortured in the agony booth because of an attempted assassination. And essentially, Good Kirk is forced to let him go, which raises suspicions amongst everybody, but he has to do it because it's more important for him to stay true to his character, even though it puts him in peril. Now, I suspect if some of the new Trek writers were out there doing this, they would probably have Kirk walk up and probably stab Chekhov through the chest and just blithely explain to the rest of his comrades, well, it wasn't the real Chekhov anyway, and they'd probably throw some throwaway laugh line, and that would be the end of it. And then it would suck. Okay. So, another show that it was a good concept, had a really good first season, and it kind of started disintegrating, but it wasn't because of how it was set up. They essentially had writers with small minds. Now, the thing that made Sliders work is that you had a group of characters, and you picked them up and you moved them into a new environment every week. And the good part is so one, they were immediately fish out of water. They had to figure out what's different about this place, what's the dangers, what's the good things. And very little of what they would find in a previous world they could carry forward with them to the next. So it's not like they walked into one world and found it with 25th century weaponry, and then they walked into the next world that was 20th century with phasers or something like that. They kept things limited. So even though you have very highly intelligent characters, characters that are able to think fast on their feet and are rapidly learning to deal with the changing situations, they kind of start each episode kind of flat-footed, basically getting a lay of the land before they have to deal with whatever situation they're going to get into. They have no control over how long they stay. Each world essentially has one thing that's different about it, or one change that makes it different from everything else. Now, I think this show ended up eventually falling apart because the writers actually thought too small. They had difficulty understanding the full scope of the things they could possibly do with the show. But in its initial concept, very decent run, and it wasn't the confines of the show that caused its demise. It was really the writers. But what makes it good is because of the limited amount of time they have in a place, it limits what they could potentially actually do. Putting limits on the characters leads to better writing, leads to better acting, leads to a better story. Now, Doctor Who doesn't get into multiverse a lot. They have several iterations. They have a point where there was a barrier between parallel universes, and they have, in some cases, it could be brought down, but they didn't allow it to dominate the show. And typically, the parallel universes were very similar to the one they came from, with just minor technological or political changes. So once again, you come in, you're a little bit flat-footed trying to get the lay of the land, and then you start dealing with whatever situation's thrown up against you. So once again, although the potential for jumping to parallel show universe every single episode would be tempting, they were smart to constrain it to where it wasn't a common thing. Because Doctor Who is a character who, if he really wanted or needed to, could, if it was available, could choose to jump to a parallel universe every single show. And he himself is kind of an unconstrained character, with the exception of his moral grounding, which would have probably made parallel or multiverse parallel universes, same thing, become unwieldy. By limiting it, they really made it work for the show. Now, really the key to a multiverse is working to change the world just enough to give the hero new challenges within the framework of their existing character. Marvel, with maybe the exception of Spider-Man No Way Home, has really been absolute trash with the way it does multiverses. Um, Essentially, instead of creating where you're taking a character and putting them into some place where the new environment creates a challenge for them, where they have to learn about it, overcome it, and figure out what to do with it, they turn it into an endless series of Deus Ex Machina, essentially rescuing the characters at every situation when they get written into a bad corner. So instead of it being basically shifting one box of limitations and putting it out of kilter, or picking the character up and setting them into a new box, there is no box. And so you can write as hideously and badly as you possibly can, and you can just make up whatever gets you out of the situation. And in that situation, the character doesn't have to be clever, doesn't have to think their way through, doesn't have to grow, doesn't have to do anything. So therefore, it sucks. It's nothing worth watching. Now, let's talk a little bit about meta. So I thought one of the more interesting uses of meta was in House of Cards. Because usually meta, and okay, their primary use of meta was fourth wall breaking. But typically, this is used for comedic effect, but House of Cards is a very serious show. And what they would do is the main character, Frank, would from time to time in the show, not very much, maybe 2 or 3 times, sometimes not at all, suddenly face the audience and start talking. And he was explaining something that would not necessarily be readily apparent, that really helped fill out the scene, where you're allowed to get into his head. Now the fun part of it is you're not 100% sure he's breaking the fourth wall at first. You thinking, well, maybe he's just letting you think or hear his thought process. Where it was finally outed that they were deliberately breaking the fourth wall was there's a point, I think it was deep into the season, where his wife, for the first time, looks at the camera, mentions a few things, and then she goes, "Yeah, I know you're here. I just don't need you as much as he does." I thought that was strikingly clever. Uh, Now, we saw like meta used in a good way in, if you ever saw the movie The Big Short, and also done in a very good way. That is done to slightly more comedic effect, but it's also in a way to move the narration along in a way that isn't just a narrator voiceover. It's a form of doing exposition without being boring. Whereas you'll see something happen, and then one of the characters will look at the camera and say, "That really happened. He actually did that exact thing there." Or they'll say, "Okay, it didn't quite happen like this, but we need to move the story along." Done to very good effect. Then, of course, the most meta of all would be Deadpool. Uh, Deadpool, of course, is done to extreme comedic effect. As far as I know, it's never fully explained why he does it. As far as I recall, no other characters in his movies do this. So one might even conclude it's maybe some kind of a superpower or something. But it's hard to deny that the usage here is highly, highly effective, very funny, helps the story along. Occasionally, they do use it for exposition, but not much, and not in a way that's detracting in any way. And I think the key to making meta work is meta has to be established as part of the character in their universe. So if you think of Deadpool and you're going to go see a new Deadpool movie, you're already walking in there assuming he's going to look at you. He's going to make meta references. He's going to talk directly to you. You know that's part of his character. And if he didn't, it would probably be disappointing and throw you off. Frank from House of Cards is very similar. Once he does it, you start looking forward to him doing it because it's been established it's part of his character. It's something he does. And we see that in The Big Short, The Big Short, as I mentioned before. Now, where it works horribly is the new Velma show, where apparently she does meta references all the time. And it's bad writing to start with, but the reason it doesn't work is Velma is an established character that goes back to the 1960s, and she was never meta or fourth wall breaking before in the past. So suddenly making it part of her character is just a really bad writer going, hey, I think meta really does well because I've seen other people use it. It's funny, so if I do it, it'll be funny too. Well, guess again. No. Okay, so let's get back to Rick and Morty, where we started from. So, the thing that made Rick and Morty work in the first couple of seasons, you essentially have a potentially boundless universe. And multiverses where Rick has the ability to pretty much go anywhere. And it's clear that he's already done a massive amount of exploring and knows a huge chunk of this universe. Now, if Rick were somebody who had deep motivations, like an exceptional do-gooder or maybe like a dictator empire builder, it would be a whole different story, and it probably wouldn't be quite as interesting because as those two character types would be unbounded with the exception of their morals. And really, those are almost unbounded morals because they can always go someplace where nothing. So an evil dictator type person could always go to places where there are people weak around him who can't do anything about it. A do-gooder would get annoying. What made it work was Rick's nihilism. Because it was very easy for Rick to just kind of go, I don't care about what's going on there. Oh, those people are going extinct? Yeah, whatever. Only thing would motivate him is from time to time he had a thing he wanted to do. And he just said, okay, well, here's something I want to get done. And here's what I got to do it. And sometimes I'll tell my grandson Morty why I'm doing it. And other times I'll just shock him in the end where it's like, okay, yeah, you were playing along with my scheme the whole time. Kind of sorry about that. Or not really, not sorry. So that's what makes the thing work. Now, I saw the seeds of stupidity were already planted in the first two seasons, but it was limited enough to where I thought, okay, I don't see this going too far. There were 2 episodes in the first 2 seasons where Rick and various members of the family watch multi-dimensional TV in the living room. And so they're basically getting channels from these, incredibly far out, crazy places. And most of them were kind of stupid. I remember one where it's a universe where people are furniture and furniture sit on people. Okay, it's practically stoner humor. And I mean, it almost reminds you of just a bunch of guys sitting on the couch watching TV, going, "Oh, look at that, that's funny." And that's so, to me, unlike Rick, it didn't make any sense. Could you imagine Rick, instead of saying, "Oh well, I'm not going to go see that. I'm going to watch it on TV," and it doesn't really have any value to him, so he's just going to watch it. It seems very unlike Rick. So, and I think that's kind of where the entire show eventually went to, was the idea of, well, I got this neat, crazy idea, and I'm going to throw it in there. And if Rick was being true to character form, you'd say, well, why would Rick ever want to do that? And what the writer said, well, we don't care what Rick's motivations are anymore. We have this neat idea that we have, and we're going to plug it in, and we're just going to do it no matter what. One of the episodes in season 6 was where you got like a sleep programming device where you could set essentially your unconscious body, when you're sleeping at night, would essentially sleepwalk around and do whatever tasks you set for it. So in theory, you could get a lot more done in the day. And to an extent, you could almost see Rick doing something like that if it was to some greater purpose. Let's say, like, he had some big experiment in the lab, and that, 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day working in there was insufficient. So he pushed it forward, and then maybe somehow the family demanded technology afterwards. But he wanted it for mundane purposes, so he could get chores done, he could work out and build up his abs and other stupid crap like that. And again, that seems so incredibly un-Rick. So what they did was they had, oh wow, we got this really neat idea for this machine that basically turns your subconscious into a slave that you can use to work an extra 8 hours a day and do all the stuff you have it do all the stuff you hate doing, but has to get done anyway. And then they just said, oh yeah, and Rick, well, we can't figure out a reason why he had actually interfaced with it, so we'll just have him do it anyway. So the latest episode, and the last one I'll probably ever watch of the series, is they went just full blown meta, where they were acknowledging they're in the TV show, and they were actually interacting with the beginning credits. And I said, okay, yeah, F this. This is done. I'm not watching this anymore. And so yeah, Rick and Morty's done, at least for me. I can't imagine what other people are getting out of it. So that's what I got. So, what do you think in the comments below? Are you still watching Rick and Morty? Were you watching it? When did you stop? What made you decide to finally stop watching it? If you're watching it and loving it, tell me why I'm wrong. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm brought you here and you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. And if you know somebody who might find this interesting, please consider sharing it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.